Hello, and welcome to the Body Fusion Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Demercy. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the core, the buzzword that everybody's trying to achieve, but very few people really know what the core is. So let's dive in. What we're going to be looking at today is what makes up the core, so what muscles are there, and then also what muscles aren't really considered the core, the unique properties that make up the core, why it's so finicky and isn't always working, how do you know if your core is firing, and if it's not, how can you get it to work for you? So let's dive into those muscles first. So your true core muscles are your transverse abdominis muscle, which is the kind of corset muscle in your abdomen. It's the deepest of the abdominal muscles, kind of squeezes everything tight in through the lumbar spine. You have your pelvic floor, the deep fibers of your psoas. Your psoas is the big hip flexor muscle that's directly onto the spine. Your diaphragm. Then you also have your multifidi muscles that are going all along the back of your spine that go from the spinous process to the transverse process, 2 to 4 segments below. You have your longus colli and longus capitis muscles, which are along the front of your cervical spine or your neck. So yes, core muscles are not just in your abdomen like everyone thinks. You have core muscles in your neck as well. And lastly, your vocal cords. Vocal cords are important because of the pressure it gives with the thorax and the diaphragm and the pelvic floor. It kind of all works together through a pressure system. Did you notice that there are certain muscles that I didn't mention? So like the rectus abdominis or your six-pack abs, those aren't true core muscles, and neither are your internal or external obliques. So when you see someone that has like these rippling six-pack abs, they are usually rippling and big because they're having to compensate for true weak core muscles. So those core muscles, the ones that I mentioned, the transverse abdominis, pelvic floor, deep fibers of psoas, diaphragm, and beyond, those muscles aren't firing properly. So instead, they've had to overdevelop these other muscles that I mentioned, the six-pack abs, the internal, external obliques, to try to compensate for a weak core. So just because you see someone with a strong six-pack abs doesn't mean that they actually have efficient cores. Usually means the opposite. So as an example, if we look at top athletes like Michael Phelps, Usain Bolt, Cristiano Ronaldo, you'll see, if you see pictures of them with their shirts off, that their six-pack abs really aren't that large. You know, there's a famous picture of Michael Phelps flexing every single muscle in his body after they won one of the men's relays at the Olympics, and his muscles are rippling, but his six-pack isn't that impressive. It's not that big, because their cores are firing efficiently. They wouldn't be able to be at the level of their sports if they didn't have efficient cores. It just wouldn't happen. They wouldn't be world record holders. They wouldn't be known as the best of all time. So what makes a core muscle truly a core muscle? So we need to explain a little bit of the physiology of muscles then. So you have tonic muscles and phasic muscles. So let's kind of break this down a little bit more. Tonic muscles are what we call your true core muscles. And why are they your true core muscles? Because they have physiological reasons why they don't get lactic acid in them. So, you can do a bunch of really strong bicep curls. You can do a lot of weight, but eventually your biceps just going to start burning. It's going to hurt and you can't lift up anymore. That's because lactic acid has gone into that muscle and that muscle can no longer have a strong contraction and you fatigue out. So true core muscles don't get lactic acid in them, so they should never fatigue out. They are muscles that are made for endurance. Now, on the opposite, you have your phasic muscles. So phasic muscles are the ones that are made for power but not endurance. So this would be like your biceps or your glutes, hamstrings, quads, your rectus abdominis, and internal, external obliques. They can produce a lot of power, but they're not meant to last forever like your tonic muscles. So if the tonic muscles are shut down, now the phasic muscles have to try to do double duty, and they can't do that because they will fatigue out. You can't ask those phasic muscles to take over the job of stabilizing the spine and producing power. That's just asking too much of them, and eventually they will give out, and that's usually when injuries occur. body's not functioning the way it's supposed to. And so eventually a breakdown in either the joints or the discs or in the muscles themselves will occur. So you need to have those tonic muscles firing at all times, and they should be firing at all times. So what makes it so that they don't fire? What causes them to shut off? Well, to that, we have to understand this idea of a length-tension relationship within the muscles. So basically, for a muscle to contract, it has to kind of pull together in almost like an interlocking of your fingers. That's what's happening within the muscle fibers themselves through something called actin and myosin. Now, I don't need to get to in-depth physiology of the muscles at this point, so we're just going to talk about this kind of interlocking of the fingers. If your hands are too far apart, then the muscle fibers can't connect. So that'd be like if your fingers are trying to interlock and connect. If your hands are too far apart, they can't make that connection. This is what happens when the muscle is too stretched. Conversely, if your fingers are completely interlocked and fully kind of clasped together, it's kind of at end plates of the muscle fibers and they can't have a really strong contraction. It's a muscle that's on slack. So if your true core muscles, these tonic fibers, are either too stretched or they're too on slack, they're not going to produce a lot of power and they're not going to be able to hold very well. When this occurs, that's when these phasic muscles have to take over the job of doing the tonic work as well as their own. And as we said, they're not really good at doing both. And that's usually what ends up with injury. Because these core muscles are made up of these tonic fibers, they should always be firing if you're in a weight-bearing position or trying to move against gravity. They shouldn't be shut off if they're that right length-tension relationship. If they're not in this sweet spot, that's when the phasic muscles have to take over. So as an example, this is kind of a fun way to see how it all works and all together with the core. If you get into a plank position, I want you to first start off in the plank on your elbows, and you have your chin tucked in on elongated, almost like you're trying to make a double chin. So hold the plank for a good amount of time here. And when you start to get a little tired, then I want you to move your head and try to look forward. So putting your head in kind of an extension position, so looking forward in front of you. You'll usually find out that pretty soon you're going to start shaking. This is what we like to call the phasic shakes. So those phasic muscles are kind of getting turned on, turn off, turn on, turn off, because they're getting overloaded with the job of trying to stabilize and produce power at the same time. So when you're in this state of shaking with having your head in extension, then go ahead and pull your head back into that original position where you're firing those longus colli, longus capitis muscles in through the front and your multifidi muscles on the back. You'll usually find that this shaking will stop or at least diminish significantly. This is when your core is turned on, and you can see how effective this is, how it's very sensitive to this length-tension relationship, but if they are in the right position, they will fire, and those phasic muscles that were causing you to shake no longer have to do the job of both, and they can just go ahead and create power and hold you in that plank for longer. So I love this test to have people do so they can really see the importance of having the whole core engaged and realizing, too, that the core muscles are any muscles that stabilize the spine, and that's including the spine in your neck. So it's not just your lower abdominal muscles. So how do we know if the core is firing? Well, if you're in office, or like what we teach in through the Institute of Physical Art, or the IPA, is looking at something called lumbar protective mechanism. So with this test, we are assessing the automatic core engagement and really looking at the initiation of your core, the strength, and the endurance. So when we're assessing this, we're looking to see, as I try to push you over and when you're in a staggered stance, if your core fires automatically. Now, if you're already in good alignment, where you have that length tension, that sweet spot of the length tension relationship, your muscles should be solid as soon as I give you a perturbation or kind of pushing into your trunk. If your core is not firing properly, then actually you end up doing kind of a back bending motion, or sometimes your pelvis shears off to the side. Whatever it is, you're not solid. You should be like a brick house as soon as I touch you. And if you're not, that shows that your core is not firing properly. So that's something that we're assessing when we're in the office. And if needed, then we're looking at alignment and going from there. When your core is firing properly, I love this. When someone will leave the office after I've just treated them, they'll say that they feel lighter. And you should feel lighter. If your core is working properly as you're walking and moving against gravity, your core should be stabilizing your whole pelvis and your trunk and getting you moving. So now those muscles that are made for strength but not endurance have to just do the job of kind of pushing you through rather than trying to stabilize as well. And you'll often feel lighter when you're walking out of the office if you've had a good session and gotten the core to fire more automatically. And this is what we want. We want to achieve that kind of light on your toes feeling as you move through life, because that means your body's moving more efficiently. But if you're not in someone's office that can assess this, how can you tell at home if your core muscles are firing or not? Well, here's a couple tips. One is that if you feel like your back extensor muscles, like your low back really bothers you when you've been standing for long periods of time, that usually shows that your core is not firing properly. So as an example, I was in the Vatican with my husband and my daughter a couple years ago. And when we were there, she was getting really fussy, the wonderful time change of being in Italy. And so I had to put her on my back. Now, I strapped her to my back using one of the Ergo babies, and she was 45 pounds at this point. And I was able to walk around for 2 hours with her strapped to my back and had no back pain whatsoever. And I wasn't trying to fight and hold her in a certain way. I was just stabilized her into my body using the pack. And then my core muscles were already firing. They were already engaged. And so I could just move through and walk without any issue, because now the muscles I needed to kind of hold up that extra weight, they were able to just kind of focus on holding up her rather than trying to hold up my entire body, and it didn't get overworked. So if you find that you're standing for a while and your back extensors start bothering you, that's a sign that your core's not firing. Also, if you're doing abdominal exercises and you start shaking really early on, that means you're probably in those phasic shakes. So those true tonic fibers aren't firing, and that will just show that your core is not engaged naturally. So if you're shaking really early on with doing any sort of core exercises, that core is not on. If you're doing another great test to kind of look at this is any sort of leg lowering abs. So even like bicycle abs or just lowering your legs slowly down to the ground. If you feel any sort of popping or snapping in your hips or low back, that's also a sign your core is not firing. So the core's whole purpose is as stable as the spine and almost create pressure to keep everything in the same spot. So if you get this popping sensation, or kind of a snapping sensation, even just in your hips, that just shows that the core, the pressure that was built up in the core has a quick release and something gives. So that kind of snapping or popping is something giving because you no longer have the pressure built up from the core muscles. So this is another great example to kind of look at home if your core muscles are firing or not. Something that a lot of people also don't realize that could be an issue with their core firing is with runners. So runners that have a lot of Achilles injuries or lower leg injuries, it's often because your true core muscles aren't firing. So your calf muscles, your gastroc and your soleus muscles are having to produce a lot of power to propel you forward in your run. If your core muscles are firing in your pelvis, it should actually be those muscles that are moving your leg up and forward. Not having to be pushed from down below, but from up at the top, they're moving in this kind of circular pattern that the pelvis should be moving during gait or walking or running. So if those muscles are firing properly in your core, you don't have to overwork your calf muscles and you don't get overuse injuries. So if you're having issues with Achilles pain from running or playing tennis or any sort of activity where you're on your feet, it could be that your core is the problem that you need to fix first, and not necessarily just only addressing the lower leg and looking at the function there in terms of the mobility of the tendons or the muscles or the joint alignment. To really get to the heart of the problem, you're going to need to assess the core. Now we have a good understanding what the core muscles are, what's the unique properties of the core muscles and why they're so finicky, and how you know if they're not firing. So then the $100 million question, how do we get it firing? Well, I'm going to give you two different ideas. So if we're going to do the medical approach, so going in to have it be assessed by a physical therapist or a chiropractor or massage therapist or whoever you go to get assessed for body alignment, they should first look at that automatic core engagement, or ACE, which is what in my world we would determine through the LPM, or the lumbar protective mechanism. So we want to see how the core is firing, and also want to see what your postural alignment is. When looking at posture, you need to be assessing how is the thorax sitting on top of the pelvis. Now, it should be sitting directly on top without any sort of weird angles associated with. So you shouldn't see that the sternum or the chest bone is elevated or depressed, or that they have a big sway in their low back. You want to look for a neutral position where it's like the two blocks of the thorax and the pelvis are sitting right on top of each other. This is going to be the most efficient, because if you were to push down on that person as they're standing there, it should feel the pressure all the way down to their feet. That's when their core is going to be aligning up and the muscles are going to be able to fire. So we're going to be assessing for the alignment issues. Once the alignment dysfunction has been identified, you need to then go and assess if the issue is a structural issue, or if it's more they just don't know how to get into the position. So a structural issue would be like you can't even passively get them into the proper alignment where they're stacked efficiently, the thorax over the pelvis. That's a structural mechanical issue that needs to be addressed. If it's that they can move, they just don't know how to get there, that's going to be more of your just education on proper posture. If it's been determined that the problem is more of a mechanical issue where they just can't physically get into that stacked position of optimal alignment, then you need to start assessing what is blocking them from being able to move there. And don't just think about it as the joints and muscles. It can also be the fascia around organs. It could be alignment of the spinal cord. It could be any sort of dural adhesions in through there. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can go ahead and check out my first episode, The Hierarchy of the Organ Systems, to kind of get a better understanding of how you need to be looking at the entire body and all the fascia alignments, not just looking at the joints and muscles. So once you treat in through there, you should be able to get them stacked properly in alignment and then train them into what is proper posture so they can learn that, because it will be something completely new for them if they've never been in that kind of proper alignment. If you're on your own, you're not able to get in to see a qualified medical provider to help assess for your automatic core engagement and postural alignment, you need to start doing some exercises to get your core firing. And some of the might be mobility exercises you need to start to do to get your spine moving better, to help that stacking of the thorax over the pelvis. But then also you need to do exercises to get your core firing. Now, here is one of my pet peeves. I do not like exercise programs where all you have to do is thinking about bracing your core, kind of pulling everything in and holding. I think that's a disservice that happens to the patients when they're given these sort of exercises to do, because when you really need your core to fire, you can't be thinking about brace, brace, brace. If I had been walking around the Vatican thinking about bracing my core the entire time, I would have missed out on all the beauty of the architecture and paintings and missed what our guide was telling us. I needed just to have it automatically firing as I was moving through. So to do this, you really need to bring it back to like the elementary core exercises. It shouldn't be that you go jumping into these really intense, exercises where you're using stability balls or TRXs, anything like that, if you don't know how to just activate your core. So you need to bring it back down to something very easy and elementary, where then you can be thinking about bracing. Once you learn how to kind of brace your core, kind of pulling in your pelvic floor, pulling up, bringing your ribs down, doing these exercises, you're learning how to activate your core. Once you know how to do that, then go to the next step up higher with the exercise, but you shouldn't be thinking about bracing your core. If you have to think about bracing your core, then you didn't really learn it to begin with, right? When we if we want to learn how to run, as kids, they have to learn how to stand first, and then they have to learn how to walk before they can run. So it really need to break it down to learn it and really truly assimilate it to your body before you try to progress in through your exercises. So you need to really focus on bringing it back down to easy exercises that you can really integrate the idea of bracing your core, and then leave that behind and do the building blocks from there. Another thing that you should do on your own is you need to be aware of your alignment while you're working out. So I alluded to this with the plank exercise, where you're going to be in good neutral alignment of your cervical spine. Then you'll look up, see how your core is not functioning so well, and then bring it back down again. Another one of my pet peeves is when I'm at the gym and I'm seeing people doing squats and they're staring at themselves the whole time, or any of these exercises where then they end up going into cervical extension. Because you're just doing the opposite of what you're trying to do. You're shutting off your core. So you really need to focus on your routine and how you can improve your alignment and your posture alignment during your exercises so that you're getting the most out of your core, not asking too much of those phasic muscles. So try not to do exercises in front of the mirror. I'm not a fan of that because your first tendency is to look at yourself, and you're doing yourself a disservice there. So yet again, if you need to be looking at yourself, then you're probably not able to do that exercise yet. You need to be kind of breaking it down in the steps to get to that point. So when you're at home, try to learn how to stand before you walk and walk before you run. By breaking this down, you'll really start to learn how to get your core firing properly, and then you know that you have your true core muscles firing and not just these fake core muscles. I hope after today's episode, you've learned more about what the core really is and how overdeveloped non-core muscles are not necessarily a good thing. What an efficient core can be is a little elusive, but I'm hoping that with this information to help guide you, you'll be able to achieve that optimal efficiency. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Body Fusion Therapy Podcast. Please share it with your friends and family, as well as leave a review if you liked what you heard today. We're looking forward to continuing this journey of looking at the body. Tune in next time.